First semi-live real humans in the presence here, and some of you are here and some of you are remote, but thank you very much for your attendance, and we're looking forward to this wonderful meeting of the governing body of Auckland Council. I'd just announce that there has not been a coup. The Mayor is with Megan Woods and looking at some announcements concerning funding of infrastructure for growth priority areas around Auckland, so that will be announced shortly. I'll read the affirmation. Tēnei tātou katoa, we seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept what the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. And that's something we can all sign up to and always have done, so thank you for that. Sandra, would you do the roll call, please?
Morena members, it's very nice to see some of you back in person. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Casey.
Morena Sandra.
Morena. Councillor Collins.
Kia ora Sandra, kia ora everyone.
Kia ora. Councillor Coombe.
Kei koneo.
Councillor Cooper.
Good morning, kia ora koutou.
Councillor Dalton.
Morena Sandra.
Morena. Councillor Darby.
Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Councillor Filipina.
Morena Sandra.
Morena. Councillor Fletcher.
Morena.
Morena. Councillor Henderson.
Morena.
Morena. Councillor Hills.
Kia ora koutou katoa.
Kia ora. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Newman.
Good morning, Sandra.
Good morning. Councillor Sayers? Late. Councillor Stewart?
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Walker?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Hello.
Morning. Councillor Young? Thank you, everybody. And just a reminder that because we've got half of you online today, it would actually be nice if you could use your cameras so that we can see you, because we have a beautiful view of you all in the room, much better than we used to have. So it would be nice to see you all. Back to you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And again, welcome, folks. And the Mayor will be with us presently. The apologies we have is Councillor Bartley for bereavement and Councillor Simpson's also for bereavement. We have lateness, obviously, from Mayor Phil and Councillor Sayers, and early departure for Councillor Coombe. Are there any others? If not, I also recommend that those apologies for absence and early departure be accepted. Councillor Newman, would you second, please?
Happy to, Chair.
All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Contrary, 'tis carried. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. At this stage, I have not received any. Sandra? Anyone? In that case, we'll move straight on to the confirmation of the minutes from the 24th of March 2022. Are there any questions or queries before I allow Councillor Darby to move? 3-second rule. Thank you, Councillor Darby will move. Seconded, Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary?
Aye.
I think Councillor Casey was in the affirmative there, Sandra. Thank you, Kathy. Petitions, we have none. Public input, we had 3 requests. Kristen Eek from the Screen Industries Sites of Significance has been referred to the Planning Committee. Grey Power North Shores, Bill Reiner has also been deferred, and Mr Wilson is going to be talking to Mr Rayner. And that's the only request we've had, Sandra. That's right, thank you. And the request that has been accepted is from the Auckland War Memorial Museum. And I'd like to welcome David, and I see Penny there as well, and James. So we'll pass over to We'll let you start. Penny, you're a board member, so maybe let you start, then hand on to Mr. Gainster. Thank you. In your hands, Penny.
Oh, kia ora. Tēnā koutou rangatira. What an absolute pleasure it is to see everybody, dear friends and colleagues. And Mr. Deputy Mayor, good to see you in that seat. The coup appears to have been brief because the Mayor's back. So, Your Worship, kia ora koutou katoa, and I hope the announcements were good. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and as you said, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I've got James Dill, our Museum Stakeholder Relation Manager, who's well known to everybody, and David Gamester, our Museum's Chief Executive, with me today. So just a few remarks from me to open up. I've also got apologies from Richard Bedford, our wonderful museum chair, who was very sorry not to be with us today. So I'm here in my role as the chair of the planning committee for the museum, and I'll just be very, very brief. So first of all, a deep and heartfelt thank you from the museum to Council and the ratepayers of Tamaki Makaurau for the ongoing support to the museum. Without that, we would be nothing. We're grateful for your public funding, which is absolutely critical to our ability to deliver for Aucklanders and enables us to do what we do for our communities and to run as a museum. We, however, recognise the council difficulties that you're facing at the moment. Finances are tough, and we understand because we share many of the same issues and the cost rises that council's facing at the moment. The museum has had the same levy funding since 2019-20, and we were seeking a small increase for the next financial year. A month ago, however, we met with the Mayor, and the Mayor asked us to reduce our levy back down to the same 0% levy increase as the previous 3 years. And we agreed to do this for the sake of our relationship with the Council, out of respect to Auckland ratepayers and in a deep commitment to serving our community. And Mr. Mayor, we thank you and the Rangatira Group for the meetings and the very honest discussions. The Trust Board is clear, however, that we cannot continue this course beyond the next financial year, and we're signalling now that levy increases will absolutely be required in the following years to ensure that the museum's debt and deficit are not run any further and that debt is serviceable. And even with the indicative increases signalled in the revised plan, it'll be a long, slow recovery and exactly the same issues as I said at the beginning that Council's facing. But with some small correction in our annual public funding settlements, the deficit and debt will continue to increase unsustainably if we can't secure an increase in the future. I'd also like to just comment really positively on the process that we've gone through with Council. Despite the financial circumstances, the process and the relationship with Council during the preparation of this annual plan have been really positive, and we want to thank again the staff and the politicians involved in this, and we're really committed to moving forward in planning for the future of our wonderful museum together. As one of our board members put it, the Tamaki Paengahere, our wonderful Auckland Museum, is the beating heart of our cultural community in Tamaki Makaurau, and we don't want to lose that. So I'll now hand over to our Chief Executive, David Gamester, for more detail and to take any questions. Kia ora. Thanks, David.
Kia ora, thank you, Penny. Atamarie me gof. Morena koutou katoa. I'll just say a little more about the financial circumstances of the museum and the implications of this levy settlement. As Penny noted, we've reduced our levy request back to what we received in each of the previous 3 years. We estimate that in real terms, and if you adjust for inflation, that represents an 11% reduction in our levy funding for 22-23. That's based on the 2019-20 levy. I think it's fair to say we're beginning to run out of road. The next financial year, our debt and operating deficit will be at the absolute limit of what is prudent and serviceable. we will have absolutely no more room for manoeuvre should there be any further shocks to the system. We're projecting a deficit of almost $8 million, and this will reduce slowly in the outer years, only if the levy rate begins to rise again sustainably. The indicated rates for the outer years in our draft annual plan represent really a keystone in our business recovery plan. If the currently static levy rate is not corrected at this level, the deficit and the debt will become unsustainable. We'll be forced to make further substantial reductions to core services. And so for this reason, we're indicating 3% levy increases in each of the 2 outer years. We believe this correction is both responsible and also prudent. A sustainable level of public funding is critical for the museum to run in line with our communities and our visitors' expectations and aspirations. Without it, our exhibitions and our public offering will fall behind, and we will be out of step with society. We continue to keep a very tight lid on costs, and we're looking everywhere for new revenue. But the pandemic is still affecting us adversely. We've got an excellent engagement with Auckland communities and strong visitation, but our local visitors only generate modest revenue. International tourists have always been our most profitable segment. Their ongoing absence remains a key limiting factor in our self-generated revenue. At the same time, we're seeing more demands and increased expectations from the communities we serve. Next year is going to be pretty tough. Because of this lower levy, we'll be forced to defer much needed work to renewing our galleries. We're going to have to defer that work for a further 12 months. And some of those galleries are now, of course, over 20 years old, and the display collections are becoming increasingly at risk. We'll have to resequence other urgent asset renewals and suspend a number of major public programs. Of course, to retain key staff, we're planning a modest increase to salaries, but these, I fear, will be well outstripped by inflation. Retaining and recruiting staff, key staff, was already difficult, and now this is an absolutely critical risk. I'd like to finish on a much more positive note, however, and I'd just like to report that we've had a really great school holiday period so far. This coincided with the shift to orange, of course. Last week was our highest weekly visitation since records began, with 43,000 visitors. And we had over 9,000 visitors on Anzac Day alone. Over the Easter weekend, we had over 24,000 visitors, our highest Easter visitation on record. These high levels of public engagement, driven, helped very much by our new Peter the T-Rex exhibit. Just to remind you, that's free for all Aucklanders, of course. So we've really been helped by that exhibit. After a long period of disruption with the supply chain in international touring exhibits, but we managed to secure that wonderful specimen just in time for the school holidays in the orange setting. And we have a very exciting exhibition program in prospect for the 22-23 year, which is really delivering on our mission to bring the world to Auckland. So in June, we've got Ancient Greeks, Athletes, Warriors and Heroes from the British Museum. That opens then. And this is followed by Secrets of Stonehenge at the end of the year, and then a very strong pipeline of acclaimed international exhibitions following that. Of course, we also have the wonderful exhibition of landscape photography of West Auckland's own Olaf Peterson on show right now. Just like to finish by saying thank you for your ongoing support of the museum. As always, we have a standing invitation to you to visit us for a tour behind the scenes. I'm very, very happy to take any questions. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, David, for your comments, and Penny. Great to have you back, almost around the council table here with us. And just an answer to your introductory comment, the government's just granted $1.4 billion extra for housing infrastructure for our Auckland housing program. So that's probably worth being 4 minutes late to council for. So that was really good. And I have to say, because you're former chair of the Environment Committee and previously the Planning Committee, if you want to see intensification done well and refurbishing our environment, opening up daylighting pipes and making them into beautiful streams, this area of Mount Roskill is a perfect example. So I'll start on that positive note. To the museum, thank you very much for your forbearance. These are tough times for all of us. And David, what you've announced, we're very conscious of, because we are facing exactly those pressures. And our loss of revenue, as I explained to you, is severe with that 900 million gone. But I want to congratulate you. The museum was looking in great shape on Monday morning at 5 a.m, insofar as my eyes were still open. I almost missed Peter the T-Rex, but that was spectacular. And I just want to thank you very sincerely for the fantastic job the museum does on our behalf, and to say that I think our relationship is really good, and that that's reflected in your forbearance and saying, look, we understand council's position this year and we'll forego the levy increase. So thank you very much for that. I have one question, and that's from Councillor Daniel Newman. Councillor Newman.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and good morning to you, and good morning to David and to Penny. I'm quite sympathetic to the plight of the museum, actually, in relation. It's a magnificent building. You've reflected briefly in your comments about the impact in terms of deferred maintenance and renewal work, but what happens in relation to the cost of capital maintenance if we continue on this path beyond the 2 years, beyond the 2 to 3 years that you've identified? Because clearly what you're effectively doing is a magnificent, iconic building, but the cost of that building must be very, very high. I love going to the museum. Some parts of the museum are really looking fantastic, and other parts you can see that there is a lot of work to be done there. If we go beyond what you've indicated you can sustain for the next year or two, and we continue to undercook the renewals budget for you, what happens to the overall cost of that program? Say in years 3 and 4, it must blow out to a point where it becomes completely financially unsustainable.
Thank you for that question, Councillor. You're right, that analysis is correct. We're being forced, for all sorts of reasons which we've just discussed, to defer critical renewal of key assets, physical assets in the museum, galleries in particular, and of course the heritage building itself. There just isn't the funding in the budget to pursue that program in the way that our asset renewal program prescribes. We're having to slow that program down. And in that process, then it becomes a cumulative problem that we will face down the line. And the museum has always prided itself on keeping on top of asset renewals. It allocates a significant amount of its annual public funding to its depreciation renewal program. And that is because the last thing we want to do is to come back to council and say, hey, we need you to repair our roof. We don't do that. We actually invest year on year in that renewal of what is, I would argue, New Zealand's preeminent heritage building. This year we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the competition for the Auckland War Memorial Museum, won by a local Auckland practice from an international competition of 170 entries. And this is really one of the most iconic buildings, not only in Auckland, but New Zealand. But it's also extremely expensive. And councillors and the mayor have visited behind the scenes. You've been on the roof. You've seen the challenge that we face in maintaining what is a very, very important, but also expensive piece of cultural infrastructure. So yes, it is a worry. It is a concern for me that that in this situation, and COVID has exposed it, I suppose, that if we don't keep up with the recommended asset renewal program, that's something that's recommended by independent experts as well, and colleagues at other institutions like Heritage New Zealand and all those experts, that we will fall behind, and the costs, of course, accumulate and blow out in the outer years. And we've always tried to avoid that. The museum has, to my knowledge, has never been to council to ask for a bailout for its capital asset renewals. We don't want to do that. We want to invest year on year and manage this asset responsibly and prudently without being in that situation. So I feel it's okay at the moment, but I think there is a real risk going forward that if we don't begin to address that funding base for renewal of the heritage building and the gallery real estate, then the cost will become, perhaps as you describe it, Councillor, unsustainable within the next few years, within that medium-term horizon. That's what we're trying to avoid that's what we're really trying to avoid, because we don't want ratepayers to have to deal with that.
Thank you, David. Second question is Councillor Chris Darby, and then the last question will be with Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you, Mayor. Kia ora, Penny and David and James. Thanks for being on this discussion. Probably either to you, David, or Penny. Can you just comment on the importance of the investment in cultural infrastructure in resetting coming out of COVID, assuming we are coming out of COVID, of course? From a global perspective, what's happening globally in cities? David, you come from UK and European experience with cultural institutions. I'm sure you've stayed well connected with those. I'm aware that a lot of cities are resetting and investing in cultural infrastructure like they are in so-called core infrastructure. In fact, they refer to it as core infrastructure. I wonder if you could just comment on that. And the second part is, I'm aware that Manatū Taonga, Ministry of Arts and Culture, put aside $374 million, and museums didn't get much of a look at that, but have you managed to apply for or access any of that $374 million? Two areas there. Leave it with you, either Penny or David.
If you're okay, Penny, I'll start with a response to your question, Councillor. The first one about the global picture. Yes, we're seeing a major response, not only by local government, by central government, to investment in cultural infrastructure in major centres of population. UK, other European countries, the United States. We're seeing the recognition that the cultural infrastructure is absolutely the anchor for building social cohesion as we come out of the pandemic and rebuilding our economies, rebuilding tourism activity and all of those things, supporting the community, supporting community resilience, all of those positives. Museums and galleries, libraries, other cultural institutions are key to that strategy, and we've seen major investment. We've seen rather fragmentary investment here, as you mentioned, Councillor. There has been a fund for culture through the Ministry of Culture and Cultural Heritage, but it's been very hard for museums and galleries in particular to access those funds. We have made several attempts and we've had some successes, but they've been very minor. And a lot of the funding has been directed at very much smaller institutions than the metros. The metros are always regarded by central government as being well funded and successful and don't require the kind of support that they actually do need. The one exception has been the major investment provided to our counterpart museum, Te Papa in Wellington, which received a multi-million cash investment in recognition of the loss of its tourism revenues. So we've seen some small adjustments and corrections made in the sector, but the major metros of Auckland and Christchurch and Dunedin have really lost out, and that's something that we want to take up with your support, with the Ministry of Cultural Heritage. We want to start a new conversation about how central government should be supporting our institutions going forward, because I think everybody recognises that, you know, from a ratepayer perspective, we're all beginning to run out of road. So that's something that we want to take up with central government, and I look forward to a further conversation with councillors about how we can work together on that case. So I hope that answers makes some response to the two questions you've asked, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor, I was going to say Councillor Hulse, Penny Hulse.
Can't help myself, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora, Councillor Darby, and thank you for the really wise question. Just to expand a little bit and very briefly, because I know time is short, on David's comments. Museums around the Motu and internationally are places that people are looking to redress issues post-COVID of social cohesion and social connection. And what we're seeing with another hat on, I've just completed a series of meetings with all 78 councils, and this is a huge issue for discussion. Social cohesion has never been more important, and neither has the discussion on nation building, nationhood, and our role as treaty partners. And this is absolutely the heart of where these discussions happen. Museums are the places, the cultural institutions where these big conversations happen. So to answer the big question, our museum is utterly critical as we rebuild who we are in Auckland, where people feel safe, where they feel socially connected, where they feel seen, and where they feel that some of those key discussions can happen. And we're seeing that, you know, it was very clear in our visitation numbers and in talking to people visiting the museum during the tricky times of COVID, that they actually felt safe there, and it felt like somewhere that families could go and reconnect with each other and reconnect with Roto. So kia ora, thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Penny. And last question from Councillor Angela Dalton, or?
It's been traversed.
It's been done. So I'm going to ask Councillor Al Filipaina to move a vote of thanks for your attendance today with us and for your presentation. And Councillor Chris Fletcher has indicated that she'd like to second that. And I just want to add again my personal thanks for your help and cooperation and the relationship that we're building between our two bodies. I think that's really going in the right direction. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
Aye.
We've got a bit of time delay as we've got some councillors online. I declare that carried, and once again, thank you, James, David and Penny for being in attendance today and the work that you do. Right, we come now to item number 9 on the agenda, with 7. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping over the next 2. Item 7, local board input, there is none received. Item number 8, extraordinary items, none have been notified to me. And now we come to item 9 on the agenda, which is consideration of funding contributions to our regional cultural and safety amenities for 2022-23. And this is the recommendations to approve the levies to the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board, the Museum of Transport and Technology, and the Auckland War Memorial Museum, and some recommendations also on future changes to processes. So I'll just to put it on the record, I will move. I'll ask for a seconder. Seconder, Councillor Shane Henderson, and Sarah Johnson-Smith. I think, Sarah, you're going to introduce the item for us.
Kia ora koutou katoa and good morning everyone. I'm introducing this report on behalf of my colleagues Ed Siddle and Chris Levitt, who are also on this call, as we've worked together to author it with input from Council's finance team and Auckland Unlimited by virtue of their role in providing advice to Council on MOTAT's proposed levy. So as you've outlined, this report provides the staff recommendations on the proposed levies for 2022-23 for the three entities, the Museum, MOTAT and the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board. These entities have separate but broadly similar statutory processes that enable them to levy council for funding, and these processes all have a 30 April deadline, whereby the levies must be set by agreement or failing that by arbitration. So following the initial levy requests we received from these entities, staff alongside the Mayor, we've had additional conversations with these entities about whether they could reduce their original requests to assist council with the financial pressures it's facing. And as you've heard, both the Museum and MOTAT responded positively to this request, with the Museum agreeing to take a nil increase for 2022-23 and MOTAT reducing its request by $675,000. So this cooperation is obviously very warmly welcomed and much appreciated. ARAFA, the Regional Amenities Funding Board, declined to reduce its request. The report concludes with some commentary about the challenges with these existing legislative regimes in the context where council has a challenging financial situation and must make decisions on these levies separately and ahead of other council planning and budgeting processes. So the report recommends that staff be requested to consider more intensive and earlier engagement with these entities for the 2023-24 levy process, but also undertake some focused discussions about future changes to the relationships between council and these entities, building on the strong relationships and the collaboration that we already have in place. So we're happy to take questions, which either Ed, Chris or myself will do our best to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was a great summary of the paper. So we'll take questions first and then come to comments if there are some. And the first question is in the name of Councillor Daniel Newman, followed by Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank
Daniel.
you. In relation to the... thank you, Your Worship. Thank you. Noting the process whereby they can make the application, and if we decline it, then we go to arbitration, and noting what has just been referred to as the growing cost of the renewal of the facility, and it is very capital hungry. What is the risk here that we go on this projected path for the next 2 to 3 years, and then we face a situation where, in order to make a correction, they're looking at a 20 to 25% adjustment in their funding in order to try and do that catch up, as was referred to earlier?
Sarah.
Oh, sure, sorry, hard to virtually look at my colleagues and ask which one's going to cover it. Look, I think we would acknowledge that obviously they set a levy for the current year they're in, and then with sort of an indication for the out years of what that might look like. And obviously council gets the opportunity annually to look at that. So I think by virtue of one of our recommendations here about having that very early engagement ahead of the 2023-24 levies, that should be one way in which we can work with the entities to understand what's coming down the pipe and how any significant increases might be able to be worked through. And you'll note, for example, with the approach that's been taken with MOTAT, by virtue of the way they've utilised their levy request, enables them to borrow and spread the costs of their projects over a time period, which reduces the level of significant increase that they need year on year. Ed or Chris, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sarah, thanks. I just add that there is the mechanism of the Rangatira Forum and regular meetings for the executive group to have discussions around this issue in the lead up to the levy process for next year.
Thank you very much. Ed, any further comment from you?
No, nothing from me, thanks.
Okay, and Daniel, have you got a further question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, Your Worship, I mean, I go along with this, but I mean, what comes to mind in a form of a question is that, how aware are we of the renewals program that the museum needs to be on top of, because if we're not familiar with that, I don't see how we could avoid the nasty surprise of the sort of costs that are going to have to come in the form of a levy to us, because the museum can't not do the renewal of that facility, and we're in the gun for it if the cost is not met this year and next year. So I'd want to know what is the line of sight that officers have to the renewals program that needs to be met, which will form the basis of future costs. Yes, we can have that early engagement with staff, but we should be familiar with their capital works program ourselves, because it's that particular cost that will have to become non-negotiable as part of their future levy. They will need to maintain that facility.
Ed, did you want to offer a comment on that?
Councillor Newman, the museum provides us with its asset management plan, and has done since we first received it a couple of years ago, and that maps out the renewals program over the next 20 years. So we do have a good line of sight of the renewals through that, and of course that's backed by a major component of the levy every year being renewals focused. So I'm not exactly sure of the figure because that's Chris's department, but it's approaching $10 million a year every year for renewals that the museum has to manage.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is just around the ARAFA funding. Is this normally consulted on in the annual plan? Has it been done this time in terms of this list of who gets what? Has the public seen this? Normally we do.
Councillor, that's one for me to answer as well. No, the process for consulting on the ARAFA plan is set out in the ARAFA Act, and the consultations are responsibility of the ARAFA board. It puts out a funding plan, which it publicly consults on, and then it determines the levies. That's determining the individual allocations to entities is not the role of council in this process. So the short answer is no, it doesn't get consulted through the annual plan in the same way that we consult on our other budgets.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have further questions, so we'll come now to comments. Oh, sorry, to my left. I've got blind on my left side, Councillor Cashmore. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
An increasing problem, I've noticed, Mr. Mayor. So with all due respect, the museum has an expensive building, and Councillor Newman is absolutely correct in that. And, you know, sandstone, limestone buildings are expensive to maintain, and a lot of assets inside that are expensive to maintain. They have an asset management program, as it is spelt out. But Ed, has that asset management program had independent review and analysis?
I mean, I would probably have to refer that question to the museum, and but I'm fairly sure that they have worked closely with external consultants to develop that asset management plan. But we haven't, as a council and as staff, had it independently reviewed. No, that's not really within our remit as in terms of the museum's legislation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We come now to
excuse
comments.
Me, Phil, sorry,
Councillor Sayers. Sorry, you've got a question?
Just joined the meeting. Just joined the meeting. I hope you've got my apologies for lateness, but just to record that I'm now online.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you. Were you wanting a question, Councillor?
No, just
acknowledging. Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting us know that. Okay, we'll come now to comments, and the first comment I've got, Councillor Linda Cooper, followed by Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Your Worship. I need to say first is that I really appreciate the museum being willing to agree to a nil increase this year, but I absolutely acknowledge in the next few years we need to start moving that up again. It is difficult, and with MOTAT, you know, We can't let the buildings fall down. But I also want to note, and I don't know whether the public know this, but my understanding is that those levies are based on capital value, which has been soaring, so that gives a bigger pot. But the ARAFA funding is based on rateable value. So it's just what I think it's a pretty unfair playing field. But I acknowledge the museum, the work you've done on that, and MOTAT. I have to signal that I cannot vote for B, the ARAFA funding, because I absolutely disagree with the way it is, the grant allocation is for this year. It's so heavily to the arts, who have not had, I acknowledge they've put online events on, etc. But if you look at the relativity, 4.1 million for Auckland Festival, but we haven't been able to have festivals. Auckland Philharmonia, 4.5 million. You've got New Zealand Opera getting 195,000 increase. You know, the bang for bucks is not there. But if you look at the organisations that have been under huge pressure over lockdown, we know that our beaches and our places have been absolutely swamped with people every time they're allowed to get out because they've got nowhere else to go. And so our rescue helicopter, no increase. They get 450,000 a year. Drowning prevention, they're going to get 53,000 extra, 1.1. And we know the drownings. We had another one at Piha on Anzac morning. If you look at Helicopter Trust, yeah, as I said, nothing. Surf Lifesaving, a measly 24,000 increase, and they get 1.3. And they're working all over the region, and it's volunteers. And we know that's so critical. They're kind of miserable proposals to me, and I know it's not us that decide it, but I can't condone that. During the last 2 years, those are the organisations that have been under pressure, absolute pressure. And if you look at the amount of increase for the Philharmonia, it's nearly half of the whole increase, and it's actually more than half of what Surf Life, just the increase is more than half than what Surf Lifesaving Northern get. I just find it appalling that that's not being addressed. So that's why I can't, I could vote for the total amount, but I can't vote for it because I just don't think that the organisations that everybody has an opportunity to interface with are not being supported to the level they need, whereas things like, and this is no denigration of the actual institutions, but it's where are our priorities as a region? You know, 4, 8, 10, 12, 15, if it goes to the arts, but a measly amount goes to the emergency services and the volunteers that put their life on the line to rescue people and keep people safe. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, this is a difficult conversation given the financial constraints that we're operating under, and I appreciate the contributions from Penny Hulse and David Gamister. I posed the question to David and Penny about the importance of cultural institutions and arts funding generally in our reset and recovery. And there's a lot of evidence around the world that, it is so important to bind people together, and Penny Hulse referred to this bringing of people together, to create this social cohesion through the cultural institutions. It's a really important part. We do necessarily get quite fixated with the so-called core infrastructure, building things that support housing, and very important it is. But we cannot lose sight of the place that cultural infrastructure is required to play. It is actually required to play a role in our reset and recovery. And it is going to be a very important role in bringing Aucklanders together, out of their shells, out of their homes, and out of everything that we've been, unfortunately, due to COVID, been, constrained from and go to. So we as a city, we've got to socialise more, and without this infrastructure and ongoing investment in this cultural infrastructure, we are at risk of not being able to do that. So that is why I can definitely support this. I'm not being a sporty spice or an arty spice on this. I'll be supporting both counts. Both sides of the ARAFA funding are really important. I'm stressing some conviction for the support of the arts and cultural institutions. And yep, we've been hit by COVID coming along and ankle tapping us on the Auckland Arts Festival, but we've got to be prepared for the opportunity of running the next one and get that up and going. The only other area I would like to comment on is the funding, the $374 million funding for arts and culture, I think it was called recovery package that government assigned. I think the Museum Hardship Fund only saw about 2 million of that 374, and that went to Te Papa. And I can't see any record of any other funding in that area, though there is a recognition, I think, in a recent summary of 46 museums benefiting. I think that was more for programs. But I guess I'm mentioning that because I think David Gamister and the museum probably need our political support rather than them just making applications. We probably need to be working more closely with them on making those appeals to that fund and other funds rather than just letting them go by themselves. I appreciate that they've got autonomy in that area, but let's offer our support if it is required by David's team. So on that, I am totally up for the investment, the ongoing investment. It's somewhat reduced in the cultural infrastructure. I'm very mindful, and many of us will remember how we decimated, unbeknown to us, because we didn't probably see the detail, the Public Art Fund. It was absolutely struck down with fury, and now it's got a real challenge to get back. We can't allow that to happen to the cultural infrastructure of the city, and particularly the big beacon on the hill in the Domain.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm very pleased to follow Councillor Darby on this one. As a former Minister of Arts and Culture, I would be remiss if I did not speak in support of the importance in a post-COVID world of what the arts and cultural sector can do in uniting us, providing a place of refuge, and also helping us really come to terms with who we really are. So I have a lot of sympathy for the plight of the Domain, and I acknowledge that it's been hard to get Wellington engaged. If you look back to the World War I Centennial Fund that was put together, we weren't the beneficiary of funding coming out of Wellington. It went to other regions. So I think it is time for us to really unite behind the whole sector. But I would be remiss if I didn't draw attention to the fact, as I have consistently done, that the ARAFA legislation is so out of date. It denies Aucklanders the opportunity to look strategically at how we want to make our investments in the arts and cultural sector, and it just becomes one of ticking a box rather than taking that long-term strategic vision that we must in terms of where we're trying to put our funding, what we're trying to achieve. So I guess I again implore you, Your Worship, to actually highlight to Wellington the importance of getting a review of that legislation. It was introduced for all the right reasons. You know, we were prior to amalgamation, we were divided. People didn't want to make that commitment to those wonderful facilities that we have in Auckland. And I acknowledge the former Minister, Judith Tizard, for her advocacy in trying to get that legislation advanced. But with amalgamation, it actually should have been withdrawn. And that, to me, is the anomaly. And that's what we're really still trying to grapple with. So I will support the recommendations today, but I would implore you to continue to talk to Wellington about the ongoing legislation that we need to really have it fit for purpose for Auckland in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher. And in reply, if I can start off with the Councillor Chris Fletcher's last point. There is no doubt that not only the ARAFA legislation, but also the museum and the MOTAT legislation is anachronistic, out of date and unrealistic. It was designed, as you and I both remember and agree, for a time when we had 8 councils or 7 territorial councils who could never agree on any damn thing, and there was court action and God knows what else. We are now a unitary authority, so we don't need to work through special legislation that was designed for different circumstances. And if you look at page 14 on the report, the legislation actually says that we might have to pay $150 million a year to the museum. Now, that would be quite good if you wanted to have a chief executive, I think a 7% extra rate increase just to pay for that. To the MOTAT, it could be $25 million. For ARAFA, $40 million. These are 1, unrealistic caps, 2, a system that requires arbitration that in itself is expensive, and what we want to do is have a direct relationship with those bodies that serve our public here in Auckland well, and we want to do it without the shackles of government legislation. So in the time that I have remaining, Councillor, I will continue to push the case for that. It is absolutely a strong case. I do want to thank very warmly both MOTAT, that has always been cooperative with this council and its working relationship, and acknowledge that and their readiness to recognise the financial challenge that we have because of the pandemic, and likewise the Auckland War Memorial Museum. It's sad that the ARAFA board wasn't able to make a contribution in that way, but I've had their reasons explained to me and I understand where they're coming from, but it leaves us in a position where we have demands on us from all over the place. We'd like to spend more on all of those amenities, but we can only spend more when we've got the money to do that, and there are a lot of competing claims on what we're asking for. I just want to pick up one point Councillor Linda Cooper raised, which was about the Auckland Philharmonia. We had a discussion here, I think 2 years ago, where we recognised that the people that were professional players in that band were being paid less than the living wage. And there was no way we were going to retain that as a cultural organisation. And we recognised that we had to do something about that, and we locked that in 2 years ago, and that explains why the disproportionate increase is going to the APO. They have worked virtually online to do performances, etc. But either you decide you have an organisation like that in Auckland or you don't, but if you have it, you can't have it and pay them less than a wage that they can live on for people who are professional and actually could sell their services around the world, let alone around New Zealand. Look, I want to commend the approvals today to council members. There will come a time when we've put the pandemic behind us, when we can afford to be to invest more heavily in those institutions. But sadly, the time is not now, and everybody around this table and online for this meeting understands the pressure that happens when suddenly $900 million that you might have been spending is no longer available to spend because it's been taken from us as a result of COVID-19. So the motion has been moved and seconded. I'm going to ask Sandra to note Councillor Cooper's no vote on recommendation.
Just clarify something, Mr. Chair,
Yep,
that
sure.
you said. As it says in the report, we approved the first tranche of increase, and this is the opportunity to approve the second. So I happily approve the first, but
Yep.
I
Okay,
don't support.
thank you for
and
that
it's
clarification.
not about the Philharmonia. It is about the.
Yep. I'm sorry, I'm really out of order in accepting it because we're about to put the vote. I just wanted to register with Sandra that you'd be voting against recommendation B.
And, Your Worship, myself too, please, against B.
That's
Thank
Councillor
you.
Tracy Mulholland. Yep,
Thank
thank you. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried with 2 votes in opposition to recommendation B. Right, we come now to item number 10 on the agenda. Items 10 and 11 both deal with the adoption of bylaws that have been out for consultation, and I'm going to ask Councillor Linda Cooper, as Chair of the Regulatory Committee, to introduce both items, but we'll take them one at a time, obviously, and also to move the recommendation for item number 10, and I'll just ask for a seconder for that.
Could Councillor Newman, he was on the panel.
Councillor Newman, if you're happy to do that, I think you were on that committee as well.
I'm very happy to second on item 10.
Thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Cooper, seconded by Councillor Newman, and I'll ask Councillor Linda Cooper to introduce the item. Can I also note, I think we have, yes, I can see him, Glenn Wilcox from IMSB here as well for the 2 items, and I do want to thank the people that have been on those committees that have done the hard work there. And Glenn, and if I can single you out, you're a trooper in terms of the effort that you make and the work that you put into it on behalf of the IMSB. So thank you very much for that. So Linda to introduce, and then I have online Dean Yee and Paul Wilson, our officials dealing with this paper, and I'll ask them to make comments following Councillor Cooper's. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and yes, welcome to Glenn Wilcox, all the way from sunny Paihia. But it doesn't look too sunny. But thank you, Glenn, for being able to join us. So this report represents the bylaw panel recommendations on public feedback and local board views on the proposal to amend the Stormwater Bylaw 2015, and the proposal was developed following a statutory bylaw review in 2020. The governing body adopted the statement of proposal for public notification on the 26th of August 2021, and it was publicly notified using all the available channels, or many available channels, as well as virtual representation to the Rural Advisory Panel. So we had 2 virtual drop-in Have Your Say events, and so basically 79 people and organisations provided feedback, and 3 out of the 5 proposals received majority support. Most submitters supported proposal 1, 3 and 5. However, there was only or barely 50% support for 4, which was probably the most contentious, and I think I note Councillor Newman had his minority opposition to that, so I need to note that, and that was that people were not to have access to stormwater infrastructure, and that was a little bit contentious. But what I need to note is that there is an approvals process where people can use, for example, stormwater ponds for an activity, but it just requires an approvals process, because these are working sites and there's the health and safety for staff and the public to be considered. So what we got to, we recommended changes to the proposed bylaw in response to the matters raised, including amending proposal 4 on the ability to restrict parts of the stormwater network to prioritise public safety and include related information notes to clarify processes for approval, and just clarifying definitions and permitted activities in alignment with the unitary plan, and adding related information notes to clarify decision making for controls. We ask that the governing body approve the panel recommendations and adopt the amended stormwater bylaw in attachment C of the agenda report. But I absolutely want to thank Councillor Newman and IMSB member Wilcox for their intelligent and engaged contribution to the process. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooper. And I'll just ask if Dean Yee or Paul Wilson would like to add anything to Councillor Cooper's comments. Dean, I see you online there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, Councillor Cooper has covered the recommendations part, and just note that I'm from Healthy Waters Department, and we've been working with the bylaw panel councillors and IMSB member Daniel Wilcox on this very closely, and I believe the recommendations and proposal will help our Healthy Waters operations and protecting the public stormwater network, as well as private stormwater systems that contribute to the wider Auckland network. So I think that's quite key in recognizing that. Paul, if you're online, did you want to comment on the infringement recommendations?
I missed that out.
Thank you, through your worship. I have nothing further to add. Happy to answer questions if needed.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we'll go to questions, and I have a question in the name of Councillor Tracy Mulholland. Tracy.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, team. I know that there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. I'm just wondering how we will go in terms of resourcing and the bylaw, the changes, and are the team already stretched? So that's the second question in relation to that, and how will that be managed? Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, team.
Thank you. So Dean, I'll come to you first in reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Healthy Waters Department, we operate and maintain the public stormwater network. So the bylaw helps with that already. And the bylaw was created first in 2015. So it's an ongoing piece of legal tool that we've been utilizing. In terms of resources, there is definitely resource limitations in what we can do in terms of operations. But I think as we develop more programs along with the amended bylaws, and we're looking at potentially seeing how we can inspect more areas that contribute to the public stormwater network, and we have to go through resourcing processes within the department and through council, as well as our usual practices. I know in the development space, there's a lot of development going across Auckland, and the stormwater bylaw plays a part in that as well, especially vesting of public stormwater assets. So we have a development team that's regularly working with our regulatory services teams on development. So there are resourcing limitations, but we work through that internally with other staff and our people leaders as well.
Thanks. Supplementary, Your Worship?
Please go ahead.
Thanks. Just for clarity, and Dean, you know, I'm fully supportive, and thank you for your answer. What it raises for me is another question, and whilst Dean did give an answer, but I think what it says is there is potential risk for us, and maybe we do need to ask the question is how do we secure additional resourcing so that putting this bylaw or the changes into place that we can actually do the work. So Your Worship, you can take that as a comment, but I think really it is a question for our team to consider and perhaps come back to me and other councillors. It's a reality check on the current situation, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll just double check whether officials, they can take it as a comment or they can address it because it's raised in the question section. Any comment from Dean or Paul on that? Dean.
I think as an officer, I don't have further comments, but this was raised throughout the deliberation as well, and I believe Councillor Cooper, as chair of the regulatory committee, is also working closely with regulatory services as well on resourcing, enforcement and monitoring and work around that compliance space.
And perhaps I can ask, I think Councillor Cooper's indicated that she'd like to comment on that.
Thank you. Following the presentation from our regulatory and compliance team to the governing body and the local board chairs, we had a paper to the regulatory committee outlining really re-adopting the approach that we use and looking at ways to enhance and support our regulatory staff in doing their job, including employing more staff, some technology, different ways of looking at that, and that was adopted by the regulatory committee, re-adopted. Just noting there were a few people that did vote against that, but I think that is the issue here, is that we are working on it. We're very aware of that issue, and every bylaw hearing that we're having, we're getting feedback from the public and the local boards, and have concerns ourselves that we need to make sure that our staff are resourced properly, and we just have to do the best we can with what we've got, but there are opportunities to improve that. And also the other thing I failed to say, Mr. Chair, is that we also recommended that staff prepare a schedule of infringement notices and fees so council can request the relevant minister to commence the process to make necessary regulations to prescribe infringement notices, and that will help our staff, because as we already know, we go from woe to go. We go from education, and then often what's left in between is nothing except going to court, and it's not worth taking someone to court for $100,000 to get $1,000 out of them. And so we need something in the interim that is more reasonable and something that will help our staff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cooper, and I concur with that comment completely, and I've indicated to officers that if we can give political assistance to their request for infringements, we're very happy to do that. Education's important as a first step, but a court case, as you pointed out, that is expensive and time-consuming, when an infringement notice would be far more effective, you know, it's a no-brainer. But there has been resistance from government officials on that, so we need to continue to push on that and to support our officers at a political level if required. I have no further questions, so I'll come to comments if there are any comments. Reasonably straightforward.
I have comments.
Tracy, Councillor Monholland, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Your Worship. That's all right. My name is Tracy. I'm good with it. Just with regards to this matter, I do want to comment to it, and I think what it raises for me is where we may be seen by the public as not able to implement the decisions that we make. So I don't know. I sort of question myself: does it make me look a bit foolish, or us look a bit foolish? So what I'd like to think is that when we are revising budgets and reviewing budgets, and we do have to consider the current situation, perhaps we should be putting the money into these types of, sorry, I realise I've got my camera on. Maybe we should be putting the money or additional funds into doing this type of work. And whilst I understand that too, and I was in a network meeting the other night where people were complaining about rates, and I was saying, well, do you really understand the whole situation of how much is is paid by through rates and other revenue sources? So I just really want to raise my concern on enabling us to be able to do the job that we need to do to support our people in Tamaki and to support these sensible bylaws that we have. So yeah, it's just awareness. I have to say it, otherwise I think we don't get anywhere.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no other comments unless Councillor Cooper wants to say anything in reply.
I wondered if Councillor Newman wanted to say something, because he did have a minority view on one of the items on option proposal 4, so I just wondered if he wanted that opportunity.
Councillor Newman, are you wanting to comment?
Yeah. Look. I mean, my minority position is just that it's a minority position. I was outvoted on it, so I accept the majority view on it. But I just respond. I guess I respond to Councillor Mulholland by saying, look, I take on board what you said. My view in relation to this stormwater bylaw, it is primarily a bylaw which is helpful in terms of the management of the stormwater network, and the primary stakeholders are the developers and the consultants who are working in the context of planning and the delivery of stormwater infrastructure that will be vested. The key challenge here, Your Worship, in my view, is for the officers to provide clarity to the industry around practice notes for how the council would expect applicants to the council to be planning and designing the networks that will be delivered and vested, in particular what it means in relation to climate change values, mana whenua values, things like that. and that was a debate that I think was quite well canvassed in the hearing as well. So from my perspective, the key issue with respect to this bylaw is the ability to operationalise it by council in partnership with that particular constituency of stakeholders who will be the primary users of the services that the council provides in relation to stormwater services, and obviously people looking to develop need to ensure compliance with that. And so there is some more work that will need to be undertaken by council officers. They'll need to report back to the regulatory committee, having completed discussions with the development community to clarify these matters, hopefully in clear and intelligent practice notes to follow.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I have no other comments, so I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried, and once again, thanks to the panel members that worked on this. We come now to item number 11, again in relation to the Regulatory Committee, the decision on the proposed amendments to the Property Maintenance and Nuisance Bylaw. I'll ask Linda Cooper to move the recommendations there, and I think, just trying to check who I had on the...
Kylie
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Kathy Casey, I think, was also on the committee, seconded by Kathy Casey. And I'll ask again Linda Cooper to introduce, and then Paul Wilson to comment if there's anything to add.
And
Councillor Cooper.
Kylie's
and thanking Glenn Wilcox once again for participating on this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is panel recommendations to amend the Property Maintenance and Nuisance Bylaw. So this is about private property, not public realm. Its effects on the public realm. So this report represents bylaw panel recommendations on public feedback, local board views on the proposal to amend the Property Maintenance and Nuisance Bylaw 2015. And the governing body adopted the statement of proposal for public notification on the 23rd of September. Must be 2021 because it's not 2022 yet. And we've had public consultation from the 26th of October to the 5th of December using all available channels. There was a majority support for all three proposals, and 12 local boards provided views by resolution, and our recommendations are summarised in attachment A. The panel recommendations support the proposal with the inclusion of examples of nuisance, because we found that a lot of people weren't quite sure what they could complain about and what they could not, what the bylaw didn't cover. So we thought it was best to articulate that more clearly. And we ask that the governing body approve the panel recommendations and adopt the changes. And also, I really do want to thank Councillor Casey and IMSB member Wilcox. It's a pleasure to work with them. And we have Kylie and Paul to address any questions regarding the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Paul Wilson, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing further to add. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, at this stage, I have no questions. I'll just give it Al Filippina's 3-second pause. Are there any comments then? And I'll gain...
Yes, Your Worship, there is a comment.
Okay, Councillor Mulholland.
Same comment as before. I'm wondering, so it's a comment, I won't phrase it as a question, but I'm wondering about the capacity and ability for us as a organisation serving the public to that we're fully resourced to enable any changes. So my concern is, do we have sufficient resource?
I'll have to take that as a comment because we're past the question stage and obviously officials can't enter into the discussion here. But if I take Linda Cooper in reply, she might like to address that as well.
Yeah, and I guess the same response as in the earlier item. However, what we found through the consultation was that, and why we clarified the examples of nuisance and articulated them, was because we found that a lot of the complaints, people complained or had issues about things that weren't part of the bylaw. And so, and they come from an act, and Paul, you'll have to remind me which act, is it a Health Act or something? If Paul could remind me of that, that actually really dictates what those things are. And so people often feel that we should come and do something about something that we have no power over. And so that does have public dissatisfaction, but it's not something we have control over. And that is where it's tricky. And so, yeah, so I just leave that there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Well, I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. The next item on the agenda is item 12, which has been referred from the Appointments and Performance Review Committee, and that's an update on the Chief Executive's performance objectives for the financial year to 31 December 2021. I'm happy to move this recommendation. I might ask, Angela Dalton has indicated a desire to second that. Please note on the recommendations on screen, I have amended the second recommendation, which was rather truncated initially and not clear, I think, in indicating the impact of the reduction of 262 employees, full-time equivalent employees, reflecting the divestment of AIMS. So I've changed that just as a clarification. This has been fairly thoroughly gone through at the APR committee, but I think I'll ask our Chief Executive, Jim Stabak, just to address the performance objectives, and you've got in front of you the paper that sets out those that have been achieved and those that have not been achieved and the reasons for that, and a lot of that relates to COVID. But I'll ask Jim if he'd like to make the initial comments, and then any follow-up comments from Shamil Sahib before we go to questions. Chief Executive Jim Stabak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors. Look, I'd like to just make a few introductory comments or context-setting comments in relation to performance for the half year to the end of December, and touch on a few key themes through that review of performance. Clearly, it was a challenging 6 months. Auckland faced over that period of 6 months of level 3 and 4 restrictions, enormous amount of disruption, of course, to our city and to our council services. That disruption, I think, has been managed well, and the cumulative impacts of the restrictions, though, continue to show through some of our latest results. Notwithstanding that, we have much to be pleased about in relation to the services that we've provided and the way that we've navigated that challenging window of time. It's obviously impacted key revenue areas, our ability to make all of the capital investments that we'd planned, delays resulting from social distancing requirements, supply chain challenges, etc. But in relation to overall performance, let me touch on a few of the key themes. Firstly, in relation to people, really pleasingly, our staff engagement score during that period of time continued to improve, going from 7.5 in August of 2021 to 7.6 in November, and that continues into the first quarter of this calendar year. Underlying drivers have also largely seen an increase, especially around autonomy, social wellbeing, overall support from management and peers. We're monitoring retention, wellbeing and the work environment. In relation to health and wellbeing, that score in the engagement survey remains steady at 7.8. The wellbeing and health and safety remains a key focus for me and the leadership team of Auckland Council, as has been evidenced by the Hauora review and the plan that has been put in place in response to that review. We've also got great mechanisms now of engagement right through the organisation in relation to matters of health, safety and wellbeing, and we've established a challenger group of people that representative across our organisation to give us input on all of the initiatives and actions that are emerging from that. You'll also have noticed that we launched our No Excuse for Abuse campaign in the second half of last year, and that got really good traction and response as well. I want to highlight an area where, in relation to people, we obviously need some continued focus. Senior leadership gender targets is one of those. Female employees in senior leadership roles decreased by 2 in the 6 months to December. 51% of our people leaders are female, compared to 60% of our overall employee population. Similarly, with ethnicity targets, Māori, Pacifica, Asian and Middle Eastern, Latin American, African ethnicity groups at senior leadership levels remain unchanged in the 6 months to December. But clearly we want to do more, and so we've put much more rigorous processes and mechanisms in place, in particular around how we manage succession planning and development for people into leadership roles across our organisation. In relation to customer services and customer outcomes, customer satisfaction across a range of services remained high, including libraries at 95%, local parks 86%, community facilities 85%, leisure centres and pools 82%, waste solutions 84%. All of those results are pleasing in the context of the challenges that we faced through the second half of last year. Some satisfaction levels fell marginally as we experienced some service adjustments, but again, pleasingly, we were able to put in place service arrangements that allowed our communities to continue to access services. Trust and confidence remains steady. In the area of regulatory services, this has been a continuing area of challenge. I would note the extraordinary growth in building consent, resource consent applications, in particular over the last couple of years. To illustrate that, in the month of December 2021, we had nearly 3,000 applications for building consent, 3,000 dwellings applied for from a building consent point of view. In the same month 10 years ago, that number was less than 300. So the growth in particular in the last couple of years has been extraordinary. More importantly, the nature of applications for consent is more complex. 70% now of new dwellings in Auckland are multi-unit buildings or accommodation. So it changes the nature of the consenting work that we do. Notwithstanding that, we continue to hire in that space. We're continuing to do our very best to meet the demand. In most cases, we are. While we didn't reach our target of 85% for non-notified resource consent applications within 20 working days, we did achieve a result of 74%. Similarly, in relation to building consents, while we didn't reach our target of 82%, we achieved 77%. But really pleasingly, the percentage of customers satisfied with overall quality of building consent service delivery was 71% against a target of 65%. So we continue to work at ensuring customers are well informed of progress at prioritising applications so that we meet the customer's expectation and simplifying the processes associated with those activities. It's continuing to challenging space in the licensing and compliance areas. Volumes are significantly higher, were significantly higher through the second quarter or the last calendar quarter of last year, in particular in relation to noise. But we are managing around prioritisation of that work activity as best we can and responding to what's been effectively an increase in volume of a material nature as our communities have adapted to different ways of working, more people being at home, more noise complaints, more complaints in the community that we've had to respond to. Obviously has brought some pressure with it, but I'm pleased with the way the team has responded to that. From a financial point of view, Obviously, we achieved $126 million worth of cost reductions in the previous financial year. We set ourselves a target of $90 million of cost reductions in this financial year. To the end of December, we had achieved 70 million of that. Our challenge, of course, is making sure that as much as possible that is in recurring savings, and we have some challenges ahead of us in that respect, although we continue to make progress into the first half of this year. Asset recycling continues to be an area of focus as well. We have $75 million of properties that have been approved for sale, and another 25 million which are in the preparation phases. Net debt increased by 106 million to help fund capital investment in line with our projections. A highlight, I think, for the second half of last year was the issuance of a 500 million euro green bond, our first offshore green bond issue. It was well received in the market, well taken up, and that's a reflection of the quality of Council's financial management. There continue to be pressures, obviously, from a demand point of view on projects and project delivery, continuing pressures on inflation, supply chain disruptions, etc. But we are managing those pressures as best we can by reprioritising and bringing focus to the areas that matter. Nearly half of my time in Auckland Council, 41% of my time in this job, has been spent at alert levels 3 or 4 or at the red traffic light setting. It's the most unique set of circumstances I think I could have imagined walking into. That said, it remains a tremendous responsibility, opportunity and privilege to lead the organisation through the challenging times that we're living through and into the next chapter. We know we share a collective desire with you to see Auckland thriving and progressing. And while there are challenges, we can also make a meaningful difference in terms of maintaining and improving the quality of life for our communities and for Aucklanders. With that, Mr Mayor, I'll pause and see if there are any additional questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Jim. You'll be pleased to know that nobody here is holding you responsible for the pandemic, notwithstanding the coincidence of your tenure with it. It's made it difficult for all of us, and yeah, you see the things that we may have accomplished with the money that we never received because of it. It's a bit of a heartbreaker. Shamil, that was a very full commentary from Jim. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that before we take questions?
No, I think that was very comprehensive, so I won't repeat that. Just to add that we have a number of ELT directors on the call as well, if there's any questions relating to their functional areas. And just also, obviously this is a mid-year review. The end of year review will be for the year ending June, will take place in September or October. So just looking ahead, that's what the schedule is.
Thank you very much for that. So let's move straight into questions. And the first question is in the name of Councillor John Watson. John.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions that go to the organisational culture and performance. And this might be rehashing information that the Performance Appointments Committee already know, but the people that aren't on it don't, so I'll take this opportunity to ask them. And the first one goes to those diversity targets, just really seeking a little more information as to what that translates into in numbers. So we've got a senior leadership diversity target for ethnicity. What does that translate into in terms of A, the number of people who are in the senior leadership team, and B, what number of those people are we aspiring to be? And I assume that collection of groups is taken as a collective rather than individually itemised out.
Thank you. I might ask Shamil to address that, please.
Yeah, so the senior leadership group, the senior leadership group is the top 60 to 70 of managers of Auckland Council, and the target we've got is to that's in the detail appendix to achieve an increase of 3 Maori employees. But this goes down to tier 4 level as well, which pulls in the next roughly 120 leaders as well. So an achieve 3 Maori employees from the previous financial year, and for Pacifica an increase of 2, and for other ethnic groups an increase of 2 employees as well. So that's the target we had set for the 2022 year. And for the gender target, the target set for the enterprise leadership group, which is the top 60 I referred to earlier. And for this one, the target was to achieve an increase of 1 female employee from the previous year to maintain the 50% balance we had achieved in the prior year.
Okay, so just to follow up to that, so in terms of the ethnic diversity there, we're looking to add an additional 7 people on top of what already exists. Is that right?
It's not extra staff, it's more the replacement. So from the existing total, if we have attrition and resignations or promotions, then it's replacing, looking for opportunities to replace them with, I guess, employees from these backgrounds, if it's possible.
Okay, so there's 60 or 70 people in that group you referred to. How many of them, if we're talking about the ethnic diversity, are from Maori, Pacifica, or other in total?
I'll have to come back with the exact numbers. I'm sorry, I don't have that handy with me.
Okay, all right, thanks. Just a further question, Mr. Mayor, if I might, going to the commentary on point 35 it is, and to do with the health and well-being score, which remains steady. And the scores reflect improvements, and it lists a number of things, and one of those things is freedom of opinion. Could someone please explain to me what form freedom of opinion would take within the organisation, and is that the organisation as a whole, or is it confined to certain parts of the organisation? But just a little further detail as to how that translates into this health and well-being assessment.
Okay, I'll ask Chief Executive Jim to respond to that.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Perhaps not all that obvious in language, freedom of opinion, but it's a reflection of the questions that are asked in our engagement survey. And it's in relation to how confident people feel about the ability to express their opinion freely and for it to be understood and heard, by management. And so that's kind of where it comes from. It's really a reflection of the extent to which people feel like they can safely and confidently share their perspective, and it's measured through the engagement survey.
Okay, so that's a specific question that's put to people then, Jim, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, just final question, Mr. Mayor, and it goes to point 20 and the assessment of the council reports by, I think, the New Zealand Institute for Economic Research. Those written reports, does that include agenda items?
Yes, it does. I'm looking across the room at Phil Wilson, and he tells me it does. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just curious to know. I know occasionally we have questions internally about, the quality of agenda items or reports we're receiving. Does the institute, to achieve a more informed and objective analysis, do they conduct any interviews or any research themselves with the recipients of those reports? And in this case, I'm thinking particularly of elected members as part of that assessment.
I'll ask Phil Wilson to the table to respond to that, please. Phil.
Through your worship, the survey provided does not do that routinely. We have other mechanisms for gauging elected member feedback about your satisfaction with the advice received, including written and oral advice. The sample of the reports we make sure that there's a balanced representation of reports from across departments, from across agendas for different committees and such like. They look at quite a number to arrive at that sort of aggregate score in terms of quality.
Okay, thanks for that, Mr. Mayor. I guess I just signalled there in terms of, you know, perhaps meaningfully assessing, in my concern in terms of the gender reports, then it's a little difficult to see how that can be done by just reading a report, and unless you're assessing the grammar and the content, as opposed to perhaps, you know, balance, objectivity and things like that. So yeah, that was what was behind that questioning there. So thanks for that.
Thanks very much, Councillor. And if there's, you know, further information you wanted on that, perhaps that's something that you would like to take up offline with Phil Wilson. Councillor Greg Sayers, next question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Jim, you mentioned when you talked about the trust and competence result, you mentioned it was steady. How often do we do them? Like, when did we do the last measure, and when is the next one planned for? And what is that? What was the last measure? And what is your target in terms of that particular performance outcome?
Councillor, thank you. I might ask Shamil to explain how that mechanism works, if that's okay.
Thanks, Jim. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the trust and confidence scores are done on a quarterly basis, and it obviously is a combination of factors relating to people's perception of decision-making, delivery of core services, and confidence in Auckland Council. Our scores have been in the mid to high 20s for the last 1 to 2 years, so ranges between 25 to 26%. We have not set a target for it because it has been quite volatile, and it set factors which sometimes have been out of our control, obviously, in terms of what media reports and so on. We used to have a target for it previously, and it was a target that was set in the CE performance objectives probably 2 to 3 years ago. But when the Appointment and Performance Review Committee were resetting targets for Jim, they explicitly asked for that to be removed because it had a lot of drivers in it which were beyond the control of the Chief Executive. So as a result, we took that measure out, and we don't have a target for it as such.
Councillor Sayers, any supplementary question?
Yes, thank you. I can't remember what the previous target was. Do you recall what the target was before we removed it?
From memory, I think it was 35%. And that was based on, we had talked to a number of other organizations which do have that as a target, including the New Zealand Police as well. And the feedback we got was it's a measure which is very hard to shift. Even 1 percentage point shift is quite difficult to achieve, and it takes quite a long time to achieve sizable shifts in it. That's why we initially went with a target of 35%. Having said that, we were in the high teens, so 18% to 20% probably 5 years ago. So it's still a lot better than where we started when we started measuring this.
Just a supplementary from me, Shamil. You've got 3 possible answers for that. You either say yes, no, or you've got a middle category that's kind of neutral on it. What was the breakdown of the 3 categories? Do you recall? It might not be something you have at hand.
No, I don't have it handy. We can always come back with the data and provide more information on it. But you're correct. It's got the 3 categories, and what we've seen is movement in both the positive category, which is the top end, the mid-20s I referred to, but also the percentage of people who've moved into neutral as well. So we've had a drop in the percentage who are strongly negative.
Yeah, thank you. That's certainly what I recalled. I'm sorry, Greg, did you have a further question you'd like to ask?
I did just perhaps pick up. I'd like to direct it to Mr. Stabbock, and it's around the removal of having a target. Now, having run with you, in your position, having to try and improve that and not having any target to aim at, Jim, could I just get your comment around should we be putting a target back in, and how because it's quite unusual to, it seems, to have a measure without a target to be aiming at. So I just wonder if I could just get your comment if you agree with the way that we've set it up with no target, or if you think perhaps we should review that at our next opportunity.
Councillor, my view is that having a target won't change our behaviours. Our priority is to deliver the services, to deliver outcomes that matter for our communities, to do that reliably. You know, we make a difference to the outcome of whether Aucklanders trust us or not through the reliable delivery of the services that we provide. We will continue to do that. That's what we focus on, and we measure all sorts of things in relation to service delivery and service performance that, in my view, are the things that underpin or result in Aucklanders having, you know, more or less trust and confidence in council. Whether we have a target in and of itself or trust and confidence, I don't think will change that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If I recall rightly, and Chris Fletcher might correct me if I'm wrong, when we removed that was because we couldn't hold the chief executive solely responsible for that criterion. You know, it may well be that a couple of councillors at the time were behaving very badly, and that lowered trust and confidence. That's not really the responsibility of the chief executive, although I'd like to make it his responsibility. No, I'm joking. Okay, next.
I can confirm that, and when I come to my comments, I was actually going to reflect on a couple of those things.
Thanks, Councillor Chris Fletcher. Deputy Mayor Cashmore, next question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Shamil and Mr. Chief Executive, for your input. Two relatively quick questions. The first one is Council's role in this city is to deliver services. You know, it's mowing lawns, it's parks, it's providing great facilities, PT, recreational facilities, sport parks, regional and libraries and so forth. These require people, front of office service people. We're in a very constrained environment for employment. How are we faring in that context for ability, if we have a natural churn of staff in this organisation, to replacing staff with like or better as we go forward? That's my first question.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Yes, it is a challenging environment. There's no question about that. We are seeing a bit of an increase in attrition, but it's manageable. But I expect it's going to continue to be a challenge for us for the next few years.
Thanks, and it's not just a New Zealand or Auckland phenomenon, it seems to be worldwide from what I can ascertain. The other question is, probably to Shamil, measuring performance of a chief executive in this manner is, to my opinion, a little bit arbitrary. And the best practice seems to be trend setting. So are we improving service levels? Are we improving levels of satisfaction, rather than having targets that become almost meaningless in time because of the factors that impinge upon them from outside a person's control? Are we investigating more modern and more applicable methods of performance management of our chief executive going forward as our only employee?
Deputy Mayor, so when we come to the end of year review of the performance in September, October, we have the opportunity to come back with any recommendations to refine the current set of measures and the approach. So we can look at that. In the way we do the commentary, we try and show trends to give that broader context. But I would agree. I think we need to consider potentially less number of measures, but more trend data. And also, we've tried to focus on the big 5 outcome areas that we feel the chief executive should be focusing on. And it's similar to what the public service CEOs are judged on as well. So again, when we come back with the suggested changes or refinements later in the year, we would like to test it with APR, and we can take your views into account then as well.
Thanks, Shamil. I really look forward to that. I think it's an important piece of work, Mr. Mayor. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Shamil, I should have asked this at the Appointments Committee, so my apology, but I'm just this gives me another opportunity, of course. I'm looking at how the employment numbers have been, the FTEs have been called out, and they were called out in the recommendation of the authors of the report that went to the Appointments Committee. But I'm very mindful of, there are 5 key areas of objectives with measures. It's quite comprehensive, exhaustive, but the authors highlighted that in recommendations. There are a lot of green scores. There's a lot of positives that that the Chief Executive is responsible for. I'm just a little bit concerned why just FTEs are called out in that way, and that's being even further reiterated today in the recommendations before us.
Thank you, Councillor. So if I agree with you, FT obviously is one of many measures we've got in the performance objectives. And the reason we have noted is because of the attention it probably gets in the media, and also when these come into the committee and GB conversations as well. So it sits as one of the sensitive expenditures or sensitive areas that we have in the CE performance targets, alongside things like professional services, spend and travel cost and so on. So because of its sensitive nature and the I guess the historical interest in this number, we have tried to be transparent and share how it's tracking. And that's the reason we have it noted in the report. We've also suggested that with strategic workforce planning, it's an opportunity for us to potentially look at either dropping it off as a measure, because with more confidence in the way we are forecasting our FTE numbers, we feel we can give the governing body and councillors greater visibility of forward numbers for FTEs, and that would avoid surprises and big upward movements through the year. So that's the rationale for having it noted in the report. It's been a sensitive expenditure measure which has had quite a bit of attention historically.
Yep, okay, I hear that. And just, we had a B at the Appointments Committee. We had a recommendation B that was voted on, and that was that we note the majority of the Chief Executive's performance objectives remain on track, which is a positive, but that's not showing up today as the recommendation. Can you comment on that?
Sandra, I need your help here. It's still in the main paper which has been referred, so we've still got the 3. I'm presuming the original recommendation from the main paper carries as well, which notes that recommendation still as recommendation B in the report.
Have we got that sitting below? Have we?
No. Maybe I can clarify that. What we note in this, we make the recommendations and appointments and performance review, and then we refer it to this committee to note those recommendations. So it would be kind of a duplication just to put all those recommendations back in. So in noting the report today received, it is noting the recommendation that you've just referred to, that the majority of the performance objectives remain on track. I mean, we could put it in again because we've put C in again, but I'm relaxed about it. It's simply a noting item, but if you felt really strongly about it, I wouldn't have any particular problems in putting that in the main recommendation, subject to the agreement of the seconder.
Mayor, I think it is actually helpful to put that in there, because the Chief Executive has performed strongly, which the Appointments Committee noted by resolution. There are a lot of green scores through there.
Okay, just to truncate the debate, I'm happy to do that. The seconder is happy to do that. So I'll ask Sandra to put recommendation B from the APR committee into a second recommendation. I think we'll make this recommendation B for this committee. Okay? Yep. Right. Last question is Councillor Wayne Walker.
I've got a few questions. Want to go back to the issue around trust and confidence. So we don't have a target, but correct me if I'm wrong, we're still continuing to measure trust and confidence in council. That's correct?
That is
Yes,
correct.
yes, that is correct.
Okay, so I just want to raise an issue that goes to this that may well be worthy of analysis, and that is that the major problem that Auckland Council has is the government reforms across housing, across matters to do.
Excuse me
with,
for interrupting, Councillor. Can I just ask you,
Yes.
there's a chance for comment shortly, but if you can just direct this as a question so we can keep it tight.
That's what I'm doing.
Well, please do.
So we have a number of matters for which council has responsibility for that you would normally expect to be reflected in trust and confidence, but effectively the control mechanism is being taken away from us by the government. So the question that I have in terms of how we analyse trust and confidence, especially around big issues that go to housing, that go to transport, that go to the 3 water reforms, the business that we have, I would suggest that there is an incredible reduction in trust and confidence in government in general.
I'm sorry, Councillor. Once again, a question starts with a question word. Can you please ask the question?
So I'm asking, I am not familiar with how we do the survey work. So my question goes to how are we doing survey work to try and separate council out as compared to the things that government is doing to us?
Shamil, maybe that's a question to you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was just trying to bring the presentation, the report on screen, but I don't have access to it. But from memory, it does pick up, from memory, the last set of results we got, the main driver of trust and confidence, the positive movements were in relation to Council's COVID response. It did pick up some mention of 3 waters reform in it, but my understanding is the mentions did not have a significant impact on the score that we recorded last quarter.
Okay, thank you. The other question I've got just goes to the measures around reducing emissions. And I just have a question as to whether or not our performance is an active reflection of the situation on the ground, where our emissions are consistently going up across Auckland. And in fact, we're being taken to court by All Aboard New Zealand because of the lack of activity around transport emissions.
Shamil, is that a question to you? Or I might, hang on, I've just, somebody has rushed across the room by the name of Megan Tyler, and she may be the best person to answer that question, Councillor. Megan Tyler, if you've caught your breath, you can,
I have.
you're ready to answer it.
Clearly unfit. Kia ora, thank you. Well, there are a couple of main targets really in terms of emissions, as you all know. One is our corporate emissions themselves as an organisation. We are on track and we are reducing those. The other one we have, which is, you know, we have some responsibility as a council, but we also have a leadership, an influencing role for Auckland generally, is the 60% reduction target that we have for emissions in the region. So, Councillor Walker, you're right in terms of the overall regional emissions targets. We are not, as a city and a region, on track for that at all. But we have a role in both the investment that we make, the decisions that you make, and the influence that we have with our communities and our sector partners to make those changes, and we're working really hard to do that.
Thank you. Do you have a further question, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings questions to an end, and I'll just open it up now for comments. And the first request is from Councillor Chris Fletcher. Chris.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I I'm very pleased to speak to this, and I'm very pleased that we're allocating sufficient time in the governing body because it's such an important part of our work and our responsibility. I enjoy having the role as Deputy Chair of the Appointments Committee, and as such, I've given at a personal level a lot of time to be able to scrutinise whether or not the performance sort of matches the objectives that we adopted back on the 24th of June in 2021. I have to say, on those 5 key areas of strategic leadership, commitment to Aucklanders, connection to Aucklanders, long-term financial sustainability and organised culture, and performance, I have been well pleased by the performance of the CEO. I'd like to really draw attention to the difficult circumstances that we've had, and one of the things I recall asking Jim during the period when we interviewed him is on that issue of visibility and leadership, and I've looked really closely at that. In fact, even yesterday, it was so pleasing to see Jim in the I forget what it was called, the Herald Supplement Project Auckland or something, and Jim was there and he was talking up the Auckland Council. He was highly visible. He was a beacon of positivity. So I think on those things, under the period of review of his performance, I've looked closely at the way he's tried to bring the family of CCOs together, and the groupings that he's got of the CEOs of the CCOs, my goodness, all these acronyms. I've looked really closely at that, and I've been gratified to have the support of Shamil and Patricia Reid as well, as I've tried to make my own assessment of his performance over that time. But I think in summary, and I don't want to occupy too much time here, Jim has performed in a way that he promised during his interviews. He's getting the basic rights. He's helping guide us at a really challenging time in the world. We know that we are going to have to make some prioritizations. We know about the deficits that we're confronted with, but he is a very safe pair of hands in challenging times. I have been very pleased to see that on the assessments that I've undertaken, he has more than met with his performance those objectives. But it's certainly going to be, the next 6 months are going to be a real test again in terms of the high inflation, interest rates, supply chain, all of the things that we're familiar with. But I'm pleased to support this. And I also share Councillor Cashmore's concern, though, that I think 40 performance measures are quite a lot to be evaluating, and it would be quite good when there is an incoming council that they actually give some thought to how they can simplify that. But I want to thank Jim. I think he and his staff are performing in an excellent manner at a time that is extremely challenging.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher. The good Lord only gave us 10 commandments, but Jim's got 40, so that's his plight in life. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I want to acknowledge the Chief Executive. This has been a very difficult, another difficult 6 months. And in acknowledging this Chief Executive, I'm actually acknowledging all the staff, because the Chief Executive, the performance objectives and the measures and the green lights that we can see are a reflection of every person in this organisation that has pulled weight through a very difficult period. So that's what we're acknowledging here, Mr. Chief Executive. Mr. Stabic is not just you, but every person in this organisation that has helped deliver programs and projects in very trying circumstances as we've experienced. So I acknowledge that. Mayor, I just want to dwell on this a little bit of a preoccupation with the FTE numbers. I think we do need to review that. Understandably, it's sensitive and media pick up on it and they amplify it. In some way, we amplify it by highlighting it again today. But of course, and Mr. Chief Executive, I'm not suggesting you have ever done this or will ever do this. You could play those numbers. You could play those numbers by, there's no requirement to report on contractors, consultants, or anything like that, or all your temps that come and go. We're bringing in temporary staff all the time. And projects and programs are dynamic, and you need to do that in an organisation. You can't have everybody hired as an FTE. So I would prefer us to look at the budget of FTEs, contractors, consultants, temps coming and going, and have look at the objectives and measures around that in its totality, because that's what the organisation should be looking at, rather than just those that are fully employed here and here, supposedly every day, subject to COVID, of course. So that's what I would do. And it doesn't also take into account the growth pressure in different parts of the organisation, and where you need to move resource or hire new human resource, responding to just the general population growth. In some areas we've got big capital programs that have been spawned off the back of, funding stimulus, and you need to hire up to deliver those programs. So look, rather than speak at great length on that, I think it's something for the Appointments Committee to consider, is looking at not just FTE numbers, but the budget area under which your FTEs, your temps, and your contractors, consultants are all hired. That would be my pick. I am aware, though, that we are doing a lot with fewer people, a lot, and we are at risk of suffering on the delivery front. And as Planning Committee Chair, I am very aware that the Chief of Strategy is pressed to put more on the work program, and many of us around this table, governing body and local boards, want more on the work program, but we just do not have the human capacity to do it. The Plans and Places team, I recall when this council came together in 2010, was a team of well over 100. I think it was about 120, 130, something like that. The Plans and Places team now is something more like 50, maybe even less. I think it's something like that. I know there's been some structural change there, but we're really stretching a lot of our people. And it does concern me that our people will only be generous for so long before they feel like, nah, it's too much, I'm moving to another organisation. Now, I know that the Chief Executive responded to the Deputy Mayor's question on that, but I think we've got to be really mindful of pushing our people too far at the moment, because there are a lot more opportunities in the employment market, and the wages are higher. And a lot of Aucklanders don't know that the wages and salaries are higher for the skills that we hire here outside of this organisation. And it's not just government agencies, it's the private sector. They are hunting down our well-trained and highly skilled people here for employment in other government agencies and the private sector. And what I'm hearing is that you can't get a flight out of this country in July. There's going to be an exodus. And many companies are aware of this right now, that there are a lot of young New Zealanders, the talent that supports this country, are wanting to exit because they haven't been able to do so. And it worries me that we will see that exodus out of this organisation too. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. And next comment from Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I really appreciated the comments from Councillor Fletcher around Mr. Stabek's performance and your summary around that, Councillor. I thought it was very accurate and very helpful, very positive. I'll just drill a little bit further down on one of the points that you did make around Mr. Stavik establishing these fortnightly meetings with the other chief executives across the group. Very pleasing to hear, and also very pleasing to hear from those chief executives how well that's working. And I'm sure as a result of that, things like public trust and confidence in the decision-making of Auckland Council, which is the group, from a public's point of view, it must head us in the right direction. I don't agree with the fact that there isn't a target around the trust and confidence measure. It seems a bit ridiculous to actually have such an important measure in place without a target for the chief executive, because it's a great way to gauge the temperature of the public's opinion of overall decision making. Of course, that decision making isn't just with the chief executive. Excuse me, it's beholden upon all of us. So there should be a measure for the chief executive to achieve, and as the mayor alluded to, that can have influence politically as well. The mayor referred to some poor behaving councillors at the time. I don't know who they were, or if he wants to name them or what that was about, I don't recall.
I was speaking hypothetically, Greg.
Yeah, okay, thank you. But the important point, I think here, Mr. Chair, is that if without a measure, how does the chief executive sit down and potentially have those conversations with not just his own staff, but also perhaps if there's concerns, even though hypothetical, your example, with councillors, local board members, members of the Independent Maori Statutory Board, they're all important things that would contribute towards achieving an improvement in that target. So just, I don't want to spend too much time honing in on this one, but just because it hasn't moved from the, I think we've got mentioned 26% rating, I just wonder if the target in there does act as more of an incentive to move us upwards towards something. So perhaps next term, I'm suggesting to my colleagues we should have a good look at that. I don't know what that number should be, but we should go through the debate of it. And I think I'll leave it at that, Mr. Mayor. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And finally, before I speak and reply, Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do shake my head, and I think I'm going to respond to that thing around bad behaviour because, there's not a lot of trust and confidence in our elected members if we have leaks of documents that are confidential. And the reason we don't know who does it, because the people do it in secret, because they know they're breaching the code of conduct. And so, we can't name names, but it wouldn't be done in secret, secretly leaking if the person thought it was okay, because they know it isn't. So I think there's things like that the CEO cannot control. We all know that our staff can't manage our behaviour. So to me, trying to have a measure for the CEO is very difficult when it's very messy at times. So, that's just my comment on that. The other thing is I absolutely support Councillor Darby's comments about the blunt instrument of measuring FTEs. It's got to be much more fine-grained. Because I'm doing bylaws and so I'm hearing from the public a lot and all the local boards, and we've had notices of motion about increasing staff to meet our regulatory compliance. I know there's pressures everywhere, but we've got people saying, for goodness sake, we need more people on the ground. So we can't have those requests and then say, oh no, we've got to limit it. And I think actually looking at this in a much more fine-grained way, maybe in the units or departments is probably a better way to look at it, because then we could meet some of the public's expectations if we had it measured in that way, maybe. So I think that's really important. And the other thing is that I'm kind of surprised that we've got people saying how, really pleased with the targets being met. And this is out in the public realm anyway, because it was another leaked document, but voted against having a salary increase, but for the CEO, which was very, very small. So I find that quite alarming that people would vote against it and then say, oh, isn't it great that he's doing so well? And as a good employer, I want to reward good effort and achieving targets. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. In reply, look, I think I'm saying it on behalf of all of our councillors, a big thanks to Jim, but not only Jim, it's the team around him. You know, I've worked in a number of public organisations, and I think that we are very well served with the quality of the staff, their professionalism and their commitment. You know, I recall when we were doing the climate action work, getting emails at 11 or 12 at night. Now, in a way, I should go back to those individuals and say, what the hell are you doing still working at this time of night? But actually they were. They weren't getting overtime for it. They weren't asking for particular praise for it. But, you know, when they've got an issue in front of them and there's an urgency in it, our finance team is pretty much the same. They work the long hours and they put the commitment in. And it's, I think, always worthwhile just acknowledging and thanking people for their efforts. Because I have to say that, you know, working in the public sector, maybe as an official or as an elected representative, is sometimes a thankless task. You know, the old saying is you'll always be remembered for what you got wrong and not what you got right. But our people, you know, we all make errors, we make mistakes, and we can always look at how we can improve our performance. But I think that Jim and the team that he has around him have worked hard, have shown that commitment, and I want to put on public record, I think on behalf of all of us, our thanks for that. Just a couple of issues. FTEs, it is a sensitive item, Councillor Darby. It's always asked about. If you didn't put them in, there'd be a valid question as to why not. I think the better answer, and Councillor Cooper and you both raised it, is to put it in, but put it in context. This council is serving a population that's more than 300,000 bigger than it was when it began, and our staffing hasn't gone up commensurately. We're doing more with less in terms of the people that we serve. Equally, the figure that Jim used before is just a really good one, which was, you know, we were doing 300 consents in March 2010. We were doing 3,000 in March 222. And, you know, Linda Cooper, as Chair of Regulatory, knows more than anyone else the pressure that that's put on our people. So when we only get 3/4 of the consents done within the statutory period, you have to take into account that you're dealing with a huge extra volume. You're dealing with greater complexity because they're multi-unit complexes. And you're dealing with staff that has been raided by the private sector and the government sector because they pay more. So, you know, whenever anybody tells me we've got a bloated and overpaid bureaucracy, I say, well, if it's so bloated and overpaid, why is it that we have the attrition rate of our skilled people going to other organisations? And I think we all know the answer to that. Can I just finally, I think to Councillor Sayers on the trust and confidence target, I was absolutely talking hypothetically, not about any particular councillor on this governing body behaving badly. But if you wanted a real example, let me just pose it as a question. Would you hold the Chief Executive of the Tauranga City Council responsible for the very low trust and confidence in his council? And the answer is no, because the bloody councillors can't get their act together, take the tough decisions and do the right thing. So I'm not going to put the Chief Executive up to take the heat for things that sometimes elected representatives are responsible for, and sometimes they're just a product of circumstances. But anyway, look, I think this has been a good discussion. There are some really good things that have happened. I didn't make many undertakings in the last election, but I undertook to do a CCO review. I think that was worthwhile, and I want to congratulate Jim on the way that he's pulled the CCO group together to get that greater collaboration that we all knew was necessary. So I think all of those things, you know, there are a whole lot of things that are really positive here that we've achieved and that we should rightly be proud of. And, you know, I think we share with the staff the achievements as well as sometimes the need to do better, and we need to take both of those things into account. Right, before I exhaust my 5 minutes, I'm going to put this to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary,
Aye.
no.
Aye.
Sorry, pause. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried, I think, unanimously. Right, item number 13, forward work programme of the committees. It's an information-only report. I'm just going to ask for somebody to move that and second that. Councillor Darby, Deputy Mayor Cashmore have moved and seconded.
Just a...
Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment, just on the work programme, I just wanted to clarify from the last item on some confusion around the CEO objectives. They were approved unanimously by all of us in November 2020, so just about the targets and stuff. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. If there are no other comments or questions, I'm going to put the motion that we note the approved work programmes. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried.
Aye.
My apologies to those online. I'm getting excited about being back in person around the table, and I'm not waiting for the votes online and to push that unmute button. We come to item number 14, Summary of Governing Body Information Memoranda. Again, an information-only report. I'm going to ask some people online to move and seconded that. I'm looking at Councillor Collins, he's moved, and I'm looking at Councillor Coombs, she's seconded. Are there any comments or questions? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
To the contrary, no.
Aye.
I waited too, I did wait. I declare that carried. There is no extraordinary business. We now have a procedural motion to exclude the public for our item on the Auckland Light Rail Sponsors Agreement. And the reason that this has to be confidential because it contains information not yet considered by Cabinet and for which an obligation of confidentiality exists. Cabinet, I think, will be considering the same thing in a fortnight. So I will move and ask for a seconder that we move into, the Deputy Mayor has seconded, that we move into confidential. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. To the contrary, no.
Aye.
Aye.
I declare that carried. For those online, you'll just need to change your channel. So I'm just going to take 2 minutes and then we'll come back. This is the last item, so I don't think there'll be any objection to doing this before lunch rather than breaking for lunch. Okay, so we'll reconvene in 2 minutes, just 2 minutes. Thank you.